Tonight we're heading somewhere most maps won't even show you, into the soaking shadow-drenched green of a place called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You're going to walk, yes walk, through jungle, so thick it swallows your voice. The air is hot, but the ground is cold. Mosquitoes sing lullabies by the thousands. You're drenched, exhausted, and the only road ahead is a slippery mess of vines and mud. Welcome to your new life. 1 foot forward, always forward. Because turning around, that's not an option. You're part of North Vietnam's lifeline now. A foot soldier, a pack mule, a ghost. The Americans never stop bombing, and you never stop walking, carrying rice, bullets, fuel, whatever the army needs. You sleep in hammocks, slung between trees, or sometimes not at all. If you're lucky, the ants don't find you before sunrise. If you're really lucky, you won't step on one of the trail's charming little souvenirs, a dud bomb turned booby trap. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing who's falling asleep with me from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts quietly. You're handed a sack of rice, an old French rifle, and a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The officer gives you a map that's mostly red scribble and says, "You're going to Laos." Great. You've never been to Laos. You didn't even finish school. The jungle doesn't care. It will eat your education, your name, even your shoes. You take your first steps on the trail. Not that you'd know it. It's not a real trail, more like a scar in the earth, zigzagging through mountains, valleys, rivers, and endless trees. Sometimes it's a dirt path, sometimes it's bamboo planks, sometimes it's just gone, bombed to bits, and still smoking. You tiptoe around craters, sidestep shattered bones, and pretend the strange humming overhead is just thunder. The humidity clings to your body like wet silk. You sweat constantly, and nothing dries. Ever. Your uniform is always damp, your feet are always squishing, and your back itches from the salt crystals forming under your pack straps. Sleep doesn't come easy when every leaf crunch could be a snake, or worse, a reconnaissance patrol. So you learn to doze while crouching, not sleeping, exactly, just borrowing a few minutes from the void. You're not alone. There are hundreds of you, all staggered across the jungle. The guy ahead of you hasn't spoken in hours. The girl behind you hasn't taken off her sandals in 4 days. You all share the same look, eyes rimmed with smoke and silence. Every time you pass a tree with red tape around it, you know someone died there. They don't mark graves. They mark reminders. Occasionally, a runner zips past, shirtless, shoeless, just carrying a message. You envy his lightness until you realize he hasn't eaten in 2 days. You munch your rice ball, wrapped in banana leaves, soggy and bland, and tell yourself it's enough. Your stomach disagrees, loudly. At night, the trail glows. Not in a good way. American flares fall like angry stars, lighting up the canopy in eerie flashes. Shadows dance. You freeze, heart thumping so loudly it might as well be on the radio. And then the sound, a low mechanical growl, like a distant dragon. B-52s. You dive into a hole you didn't dig, curl up like a worm, and wait. The ground shakes. Trees fall. The sky seems to melt. When it's over, everything is wrong. You can't hear. Your hands are shaking. Your rice bag is torn. You patch it with banana fiber and keep walking. You pass what used to be a base. Charred logs, bent pots, a single shoe. No bodies. Those were flung somewhere else. The only sound is the drip of rain through the broken trees. You don't stop. You just note it, log it in the mental list of places not to linger. Sometimes, the trail splits. One path leads to Cambodia, one to Laos, one to nowhere. The map doesn't help. It's out of date before it leaves Hanoi. You guess. You're often wrong. That's how you find the crater field. Dozens of pockmarks filled with brown water, each wide enough to swallow a truck. You cross them on fallen branches, arms out, heart pounding. One slip, and you're soup. You've seen it happen. Then there are the guides. Old men with machetes and stories that make your hair stand up. They move silently. They know the trail better than anyone. They point, you follow. You don't ask questions. You definitely don't laugh when one mutters about ghosts in the trees. The trail is littered with relics. Broken shovels, helmets rusted through, ammo boxes cracked open by monkeys. You once saw a cigarette case from the French War, still tucked into a boot. You left it there. Superstition maybe, or respect. At some point it begins to rain. Not politely. The sky explodes. Within seconds, you're soaked to the marrow. Rivers rise out of the dirt. The trail becomes soup. Your sandals suction into the mud. With each step, you slip, curse softly, and keep moving. Everyone does. No one stops unless they can't breathe. And the leeches. Oh, the leeches. They drop from trees, wriggle into socks, and feast without pain. You only notice them when your blood trickles onto your ankle. You burn them off with matches, or fingers, if you're brave. The worst ones, in the nose. Don't ask how. By the end of the week, your body isn't yours. It's a walking pile of aches, blisters, scrapes, and mystery bites. You smell like rot and smoke. You haven't seen your own reflection since you left. And maybe that's for the best. And still, you walk. Because someone up ahead needs bullets. Someone behind you needs rice. The trail needs you, even if you don't make it to the end. You keep walking. Though the trail is barely there now, just the ghost of a path clinging to the mountainside. Some parts are so narrow, you have to turn sideways. Your left shoulder brushing wet leaves. Your right foot inches from a sheer drop. The fog is so thick, it feels like walking through a dream, where you forgot your way home. And in some ways, they told you it was a trail, but they didn't tell you it was a maze. A shifting, living, breathing network of paths, splintering into decoys, doubling back on themselves, snaking through Laos and Cambodia like some kind of jungle hydra. And you never know which path is real, until it's too late. One leads to a friendly outpost with warm rice and salted fish. The next drops you straight into an American ambush, or a field mine so cleverly, it looks like nothing at all. You stop trusting the ground. The jungle is always watching, always changing. One day, you wake up, and the path is gone, erased overnight by an airstrike, a landslide, or the jungle simply deciding to grow back. You wait for a guide, or wander in circles, hoping you're not walking in your own footprints. Historians still argue whether there were 10,000 miles of trail, or 16,000, because no one ever mapped it fully. Even the US military couldn't figure it out, and they tried very hard, with satellites, and spies and everything. Sometimes you're lucky enough to see a marker, just a scrap of red cloth tied to a branch. You learn quickly, red is safe. Blue means danger. Yellow? Yellow means you're already in danger, and just haven't realized it yet. You follow these clues like a blind mouse in a burning maze. Even more confusing. The trail isn't just dirt. It's paths through rivers, it's bamboo ladders up cliff faces, it's underground tunnels, vine bridges, logs laid across swamps. You walk, crawl, slide, and sometimes just wade chest deep in a current that could sweep you into next week. And every time you think, surely this is the worst part, the trail chuckles and throws something new at you. A ravine, a collapsed rope bridge, a tangle of thorns so dense it tears your skin through your uniform. At one point, you pass a group of sappers, barefoot engineers, laying logs over a fresh bomb crater. They don't speak. They're too busy testing whether the wood will hold. One shrugs at you as you pass. A minute later, you hear the bridge groan behind you and snap. You don't look back. You don't really see other groups anymore. You glimpse them. A few flickers of movement between trees. A soft cough, the swish of a rice sack being hoisted. And then they vanish. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, you hit a way station. A tiny hut built into the undergrowth, with a tarp roof and a water barrel made from an old fuel drum. You rest for an hour, maybe two. They give you dried cassava. You eat it like candy. But those stations move, constantly. If American planes get wind of one, they don't just bomb it, they obliterate the entire hillside. So the stations pack up and relocate. Sometimes overnight. It's a paranoid ballet. played to the rhythm of distant bombers and whispered intel. You get used to sleeping in places that might not be there tomorrow. The Americans call it the trail, like it's one road, but you know better. You've heard of Route 2015-922, the Sihanouk Trail, names whispered between squadrons, like the names of dead friends. Some routes are faster but deadlier, others are safer, but so slow, it feels like time is melting. Commanders argue endlessly over which to take. Some even suspect the maps are booby-trapped with disinformation. No one's really sure. One quirky thing, the trail sometimes talks. Not with words but with signs. A twig bent a certain way. A pile of rocks. 3 cuts in the bark of a kapok tree. These are trail code, messages from the advanced teams. Go left. Bridge out. Don't drink the water. You learn to read them like a second language. Miss one, and you could be walking into a trap. Or worse, into Laos with no way back. Now and then you reach a fork where the jungle has clearly reclaimed the right path. Trees growing straight through it, vines strangling what used to be rope guide rails. You stop, wonder, did a squad vanish here? Was this the shortcut that turned into a grave? You remember a story an older comrade told, how one unit in 66 took the wrong branch near Mogia Pass, and was never seen again. Not even bodies, just disappeared. Some say the trail itself swallowed them, some say they defected. Some say ghosts. Historians still argue whether these disappearances were real or myth. But the soldiers, they believe. And then, there are the maps. Paper ones, that melt in the rain. Hand-drawn ones, etched in charcoal, passed hand to hand, like sacred scrolls. None of them are right. You learn not to trust them completely. You trust the mud on your boots more. The shape of a ridgeline. The sound of distant artillery, echoing through the hills. The trail teaches you to navigate not by direction, but by intuition. Every few miles, there's another checkpoint. A few logs across the path. A rusted barrel for boiling water. Someone with a tired face and a notebook. They ask for your unit number, where you're heading, what you're carrying. You answer automatically, even if you've forgotten your own name. They nod, tell you to hurry. Sometimes they don't speak at all. They just wave you on with a look that says you'd better not stop here. But what's strange is this. Despite the chaos, despite the shifting paths and invisible borders, you feel like the trail knows where you're going. Not you, the trail. It bends for you, coils around threats, guides you like an old friend, with terrible manners. You curse it, but you follow it. You dream of it, even when you are awake, because once you step onto the Ho Chi Minh Trail, you're not walking anymore. You're being pulled. There's no way around it. Everything you carry is a punishment. Your pack isn't light, not even close. It's a bulging, back-breaking monstrosity, filled with rice, AK-47 rounds, mortar shells, medical kits, fuel cans, and sometimes even pieces of anti-aircraft guns. No one tells you to carry less. They just tell you to carry faster. The standard load hovers somewhere around 40 kilos. On paper, in reality, the packs swell with every supply shortage. If someone up front runs out of bullets, it's your fault. If a rice station goes hungry, it's your fault. So you take it all. The straps dig trenches into your shoulders, your spine creaks, your knees protest. But the pack doesn't care. It's your silent, sullen partner. There's no animal to help you. Not a single ox or mule survives long on the trail. They're loud, clumsy, and delicious to the enemy. A buffalo gives you away in seconds. A man in sandals, silent as moss. So you hunch over, adjust the ragged towel you've wound around your forehead for padding, and let the straps tighten one more notch. Every step is a negotiation with gravity. You learn to move like a ghost. Low center of gravity, short steps, minimal noise. Let the pack sway gently, not too much, or it throws off your balance. It feels like walking on a tightrope with bricks strapped to your back. Uphill climbs? Don't even ask. You crawl sometimes, you dig your fingers into the dirt, and haul yourself up a slope, gasping, eyes stinging with sweat. Sometimes you get clever. Build a bamboo sled, drag it behind you like a stubborn dog, or lash your pack to a broken bicycle frame and push it through the undergrowth, axle groaning with every bump. A few comrades even rig pulley systems with vines and ropes to haul gear up cliffs. But cleverness takes time, and time on this trail is a dangerous luxury. Your body rebels. The muscles in your neck knot like ship rope. Your hands grow calluses on calluses. The skin under your arms blisters from the chafing straps. There are men, grown, hardened men, who burst into tears mid-march. Not from fear or grief, but because they simply can't take another step with that cursed pack digging into their spine. And what happens when you do drop your pack? If the gear spills in a ravine or is shredded by shrapnel, that's not an inconvenience. That's a death sentence. For someone. You may be the guy holding the last outpost near Kesan, the sniper squad waiting for a scope they'll now never get. You carry not just supplies but responsibility. The trail turns you into a lifeline, whether you want it or not. And the weight changes you. Your posture twists. Your pace slows to a shuffle. You eat while walking, drink while walking, even relieve yourself while walking if the situation's bad enough. You develop this rolling gait, somewhere between a limp and a dance, because if you stop moving, your legs might just forget how to start again. Every now and then, the unit halts. 5 minutes, no more. You ease the pack to the ground like a sleeping baby. Rub your shoulders, stretch your fingers. Someone offers a cigarette rolled from old newspaper. You trade your last half ball of sticky rice for it. No one speaks loudly. Voices carry. Instead, there's a lot of nodding, silent glances and mouth movements with no sound. Occasionally, a higher-up walks past, an officer with clean boots and a clipboard, somehow untouched by mud or misery. You wonder how far he's walked. You wonder what his pack weighs. You wonder briefly how far you could throw that clipboard. Night doesn't offer much relief. If anything, it makes everything worse. The straps cut deeper into cold flesh. Your breath fogs. The air smells of mildew and gun oil. You wrap your body around your pack while sleeping. Not for warmth, but because if you lose it, you lose everything. Packs get stolen, or lost, or eaten by wildlife. Believe it or not, one guy swore a monkey took off with his whole ammo pouch. No one believed him, but the bullets were gone. The trail isn't a one-way journey. Once you deliver your load, you get a new one. Maybe it's wounded comrades to carry back. Maybe it's the body of a courier wrapped in banana leaves. Or maybe, worst of all, it's just an empty stretch of trail and a command to go back for more. You're a shuttle on legs. Food doesn't lighten the load either. It's rationed so tightly you don't carry extra. You carry less, enough for a day, maybe 2. Dried sweet potatoes, rice wrapped in lotus leaves. A few pickled vegetables tied in waxed paper. It weighs nothing, and somehow still feels like too much. Sometimes you see others break down. A man who just stops, lets the pack fall, and sits in the mud, not sleeping, not crying, just done. The unit steps over him. No time to talk, no time to carry extra. If he gets up later, good. If not, well, the jungle remembers. There's a joke that the trail turns you into a turtle, always carrying your house, always hiding in it. But the joke's not funny anymore. Not after weeks of trench foot and burst blisters. Not after watching a man's back peel from friction burns. You start to think the pack is growing heavier, even when it's half empty. Maybe it's not just the weight of supplies. Maybe it's the memories. Because this pack has seen things. It's been through bombings. It's held letters from home and body parts alike. It has soaked in blood, sweat, and rainwater. And it will keep going, even if you don't. Someone will pick it up, sling it on, and walk into the green inferno again. And that's the worst part. Knowing the pack doesn't care who carries it, only that it keeps moving. The bombs don't care about your schedule. They don't wait for a rest break or a dry pair of socks. They fall when they fall, and when they do, the sky becomes a mouth screaming fire. At first you hear it in the distance, a distant hum like a swarm of metallic bees, steadily growing louder. Then a whine, so low it rattles your ribs. That's the moment your stomach drops. You don't need to be told, you just know, a B-52 strike is coming. You don't run. Running means noise. Running means panic. You drop everything. Pack, pride, even the rice ball in your hand. and dive for whatever cover the jungle grudgingly offers. A shallow trench, a half-buried foxhole, under a rotting log if you have to, anything to shield you from what's about to come. Then it hits. The ground doesn't shake, it lurches. Trees split in half mid-air. The pressure wave punches through your skull like a bell made of pain. And the sound, it's not a bang, it's a roar, so low and wide it feels like being swallowed by the earth. You don't hear it so much as drown in it. The bombs fall in patterns, laid out like grid paper from hell. One row after another. Arclight raids, they call them. Precision carpet bombing from 30,000 feet. You're not a person to them. You're a dot in a jungle grid. And today, there are racing dots. If you're in the wrong square, that's it. No funeral, no marker, just a puff of earth, a scorch mark, and a ripple in the undergrowth. You learn to predict them. You get twitchy when the air suddenly stills, or the birds go silent. That means the big planes are near. Sometimes they bomb the same path every few hours, turning it into a moonscape. Other times they bomb at random, like some cruel cosmic game of dice. You walk past craters the size of small houses, some filled with water, others still steaming. Trees around them are splintered like toothpicks. The air smells of sulfur, sap, and cooked earth. Sometimes you find a boot, just a boot. You don't look for the rest. Historians still argue whether the bombing slowed the North Vietnamese advance or merely hardened it. But for you, there's no debate. The trail is a gauntlet, and the bombs are the blades. After a while, you stop reacting. You hear the rumble, dive without thinking, and wait. You press your face into mud, so cold it numbs your lips, and you whisper the same word again and again. Not me, not me. You lose friends. Comrades you were just speaking to 5 minutes ago. You shout their names into the smoke and ash, but there's no answer. You mark their last location in your mind, knowing you'll never return to it. Sometimes the airstrikes come with napalm. That's when the jungle itself screams. The fire clings. It doesn't burn. It devours. Leaves hiss, trees melt, and anything breathing dies. If you're close, you feel your lungs seize. If you're far, you see the orange blossoms of fire rising through the canopy, like sick fireworks. Other times, it's cluster bombs. Tiny explosives meant to maim, not kill. A cruel twist, because a wounded man slows the unit more than a dead one. So you crawl past comrades with missing feet, or drag someone with a blown-out shoulder while trying not to vomit from the smell. You get good at silence, at pressing your tongue against the roof of your mouth so you don't scream when shrapnel nicks your calf. At biting your sleeve when you see someone die without warning. You become a connoisseur of suffering. That crater was a 500-pounder. That tree split from a pressure wave. That metal shard lodged in your thigh. American steel. The strangest part is the aftermath. The eerie quiet, smoke rising through holes in the canopy, the metallic taste in the air. You dig your gear out of the mud and keep walking. You don't talk about what just happened, not because you're brave, but because if you open your mouth, everything might come out. The fear, the guilt, the truth. Once, you saw a monkey perched on a branch above a fresh crater, just watching, not scared, just curious. You laughed, couldn't help it. Then you cried because it was the first sound you'd made in hours. Command says the bombings are random, but you know better. The Americans have eyes in the sky, spotter planes, drones, even ground infiltrators. You learn to move at dusk or during heavy rain. You camouflage with leaves and mud. One time, a whole platoon covered themselves in buffalo dung to avoid infrared sensors. No one wanted talk about that week. And then there's the sound that never leaves you. The echo of distant bombs. You'll hear it in your dreams. Years later. Some say their ears ring for life. Others say their hearts never stopped pounding. You get superstitious. You start believing the jungle has moods. That some trees whisper warnings. That certain rocks protect you. That if you survive a raid, you have to walk backward 3 steps, so the next one misses. You make deals with gods you don't believe in. You collect fragments, not as souvenirs, but as reminders. A bent helmet, a shard of glass, a twisted spoon. Each one tells a story you'll never share, not because you don't want to, but because no one back home would believe you. Eventually, the sky clears, birds return, the air fills with the buzz of insects and the rustle of wind. But something's changed. The jungle feels thinner, nervous. You feel it too. Another raid will come. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in an hour. And when it does, you'll dive again. You'll pray again. And maybe this time, you won't get back up. You'd think the jungle might offer a little mercy, being your only shelter on the trail. But no, the jungle is the worst roommate you've ever had. Loud, filthy, full of bugs, and deeply, deeply personal in its hatred for your comfort. Start with the leeches. They're everywhere. You don't notice them until you feel a weird dampness in your boot or a soft squish under your collar. You pull back your sleeve and find a black slug feasting on your arm like it owns the place. They don't hurt at first. That's the creepy part. They numb you. Then they balloon, fat and lazy, on your blood. You try salt, fire, even cigarettes to get them off. Doesn't matter. There's always another one waiting. Then come the ants. Not the kind you'd flick off a picnic blanket. These ants bite, and they don't do it politely. They swarm, march in lines across your gear, your clothes, your face. You've woken up with ants in your nose. You've watched a comrade yank off his pants mid-patrol because fire ants decided to hold a meeting in his underwear. The trees don't help. Some drop branches without warning. Some are slick with fungus and rot. Climb one and you might fall through it like it's made of paper. Others are full of wasps, big ones. One sting and your arm balloons. 2 stings and you're out for the day. 3, and you might not wake up. Historians still argue whether the deadlier hazards on the trail were American-made or nature-born. The jungle is voting strongly for the latter. The ground is worse. Not solid, not liquid. Something in between. The topsoil is wet clay, always just one step away from turning into a mudslide. Sometimes you plant your foot and hear that sinister slurp as your sandal stays behind. You dig it out. You always dig it out, even if it means stopping while others pass you, eyes averted. No one wants to be next. Sometimes you stumble on sinkholes. Not the big dramatic kind, just a subtle sag in the ground that suddenly swallows your leg up to the thigh. You don't scream. Screaming is for later. Right now, you just dig yourself out, check for snakes, and keep walking. Let's talk about the animals. The jungle is crawling with them, most of them unbothered by your presence until you bother them. Snakes, mostly. Green pit vipers, camouflaged, so well they look like vines. One soldier sat down to rest, leaned on a branch, and got bitten on the neck. He didn't even have time to ask what happened. Monkeys steal food. Civets scream in the night, like tortured ghosts. Frogs squirt foul-smelling liquid when startled. And the spiders? Some are the size of your palm, and they jump. Imagine that crawling up your chest at 2 in the morning. You slap it off, but now it's angry. You stop caring after a while. A beetle crawls into your shirt. Fine. A bat flutters out of your hammock when you unroll it. Whatever. The jungle's trying to kill you, sure, but it's doing it casually, like it's not even putting in the effort. Then there are the smells. Rotting vegetation, wet socks, moldy rice. You live in a soup of decay. You start to notice your own scent, a mix of sweat, mildew, and whatever died near your last camp. Even when you wash in a river, if you're lucky enough to find one that isn't poisoned or full of leeches, you never feel clean, just temporarily less awful. Water, by the way, is a gamble. You fill your canteen from streams and hope it's not full of bacteria, hope it's not downstream from something dead. Boiling it takes time and fire attracts attention. You make choices, thirst or risk. Most choose risk. And fire itself. Good luck lighting one. The air is so damp your matches give up. Your wood crumbles into soggy pulp. And if you do manage a flame, the smoke might give you away. So you huddle around tiny miserable fires, using twigs so thin they burn in seconds, and hoping no aircraft is overhead. Oh, and the fungus, athlete's foot. Child's play. Jungle rot is a different beast. It eats skin, starts as an itch, then a rash, then open sores. Your feet go soft, blister, then peel. You keep walking anyway. What choice do you have? You sleep in hammocks when you can. If you're smart, you hang it high and wrap yourself like a spring roll. Mosquito netting tucked tight, no openings. You learn to recognize the hum of malaria-carrying mosquitoes. The fever they bring is no joke. Some men go mad, some shake so hard their teeth crack. And the only cure? Hope someone packed quinine and that it wasn't destroyed in the last airstrike. Sometimes you dig a foxhole and sleep in it. Not for comfort, for invisibility. If a plane comes, you roll in and pull leaves over your head. You dream in staccato bursts. 5 minutes here, 10 there. Dreams of dry clothes, hot soup, and silence. Once you heard a guy mutter in his sleep, "I miss the city." He was from Hanoi, used to fix bicycles. The next day he stepped on a spiked vine, sliced open his ankle, and limped for the next week. He didn't say much after that. The jungle broke something in him. There's a constant tension between stillness and movement. If you stay too long, something will crawl into your boot or burrow under your skin. If you move too fast, you trip, fall, and bleed. Either way, the jungle's watching. And despite all this, despite the bugs, the bites, the rot, and rain, and poison, and parasites, you keep going, because ahead of you, someone needs what's in your pack. Behind you, someone's counting on you to deliver, and above you, just more green. Always green. When the rains arrive, they don't tap politely on the leaves. They crash down like the sky's falling apart. You don't get a warning. One moment, you're hiking under a cloudy ceiling. The next, you're soaking through to the bone in a matter of seconds. The jungle floods instantly. Paths vanish. Your gear doubles in weight. And the worst part, the rain never really stops. It just shifts between loud and louder. Monsoon season is months of this. Continuous deluge. It's not even just wet, it's alive. Sheets of water pour from every direction, making your world feel like it's underwater even when you're not. You try to stay dry, but that's a joke. Your shirt sticks to your back like a second colder skin. Your socks become sponges. Your boots squish with every step. Your hammock is a miserable puddle swing that offers all the warmth of a wet napkin. Fire, forget it. You can't cook. You can't boil water. You can barely smoke a cigarette unless you dry it inside your boot for a full day. And even then it tastes like mildew and sadness. Someone once tried to make a stove out of a rusted tin can and motor oil. It worked for 5 minutes, then it exploded. We don't talk about what happened after that. There's a trick to staying alive in this. Layers of banana leaves. You stuff them inside your clothes. Line your hammock with them. Wear them like armor. They won't keep you dry, but they might keep your skin from pruning so badly that it peels off. One guy swore by wrapping his feet in tree bark, his feet looked like pale prunes instead of black ones. Progress? Trench foot is the constant threat. Your toes begin to tingle, then go numb, then ooze. The medics have one solution: dry socks, which is hilarious. Because you've had exactly 2 pairs since this whole nightmare began. One's already disintegrated. The other's now a sock-shaped colony of moss, so you cut new socks from rags or old rice bags and hope for the best. And everything smells worse when it's wet. Your own body odor goes sour. Your gear smells like mildew and motor oil. Your food tastes like damp cardboard. You chew without joy. Rice. Again. Always rice. Wet, sticky, usually cold. Sometimes you catch a frog, roast it over a rare fire, and pretend it's chicken. One night, you found half a lizard and didn't ask questions. Hunger overrules standards. Even your weapon suffers. Rifles rust if you blink at them wrong. You clean them obsessively, scraping them down with leaf fiber and dirty rags. But you still find orange streaks spreading like infection. If your gun jams, you're not just defenseless, you're dead. So you sleep with it across your chest, under your poncho, in the hammock, always within reach. Then come the landslides. Rain soaks the hills, until they give up. You hear it, first a creak, then a rumble, then an explosion of dirt and trees crashing down like the whole mountain's decided it's done with vertical living. You run. if you can. Sometimes there's nowhere to go. You've seen men buried up to their waist in mud. One guy vanished altogether, no scream, just gone. The only sign he'd been there, a floating sandal. And if the land doesn't collapse under you, the trail still disappears. It becomes a brown river. You wade, feeling each step, testing for hidden pits or slippery rocks. A misplaced foot can mean a broken ankle, or worse, a shattered shin. You limp, tape it, keep going. No one gets medevaced from here. You don't even get a mule cart. You walk. There's no dry place to rest. Even under the thickest tree canopy, the rain finds you. It drips, seeps, and creeps into everything. You curl into a ball under your poncho, if you have one. If not, you just lie in the mud, hoping your face won't be under a runoff when the next wave comes. Despite the cold and wet, mosquitoes still thrive, especially at dusk. They rise from puddles in black clouds, singing their high-pitched song of doom. You slap, scratch, curse, and smear mud over your face as makeshift repellent. Someone says garlic helps, but where are you supposed to find garlic out here? Someone else swears by rubbing ash into their skin. You try it. It works for 10 minutes. Then the rain washes it off. Your skin becomes soft, not smooth, fragile, like tissue paper. You tear easily. A brush against a branch becomes a long, bloody gash. Scratches fester. Fungus blooms in the folds, behind your knees, your elbows, even under your arms. You develop a limp you don't even notice until someone points it out. By then it's too late. You've been walking on a split heel for 3 days. There's no sun, no warmth, just a blanket of grey clouds pressing down on you. You forget what it's like to be dry. You forget what it's like to feel warm air. Sometimes, during brief breaks in the rain, you stand still, arms open, hoping for a breeze. Something, anything, but the air stays damp, heavy, and still. You sweat, even while shivering. Nature is confusing like that. Sometimes the trail washes away completely. What used to be a path is now a gully. You rebuild it, laying bamboo slats or dragging logs across the muck. Sometimes you just go around, if there isn't around. One night, your unit spent 6 hours detouring through a swamp. By morning, 2 men had leech bites in places that would make a priest faint. But you can't stop. The rain doesn't mean the war pauses. Supplies still need to move. Guns still need to reach the front. And so you trudge, one sloshing step at a time, your feet turning into waterlogged shadows of themselves. You dream of dryness, not comfort, not safety, just dryness. A single moment where your shirt doesn't cling to your back and your socks don't squish. That's it. That's the bar now. And when the rain finally stops, it's not relief. It's just a new kind of silence. The kind that means the plains can see you again. You'd think the night would offer some peace, some stillness after the endless slog of the day. But it doesn't. Night isn't your friend. It's just the same jungle, only worse. Pitch black, damp, buzzing with danger, and far too quiet in all the wrong ways. There are no lanterns on the trail, no firelight, nothing that glows unless it's covered, buried, or held close to the chest. Even the moonlight can betray you. A single flicker, a flash of a match, and suddenly you're a target. American spotter planes sometimes sweep over at night, looking for the glint of metal or the orange bloom of a cigarette. You stop lighting anything. You eat cold. You stay quiet. Always quiet. And then there's the waiting. Because that's all night is. Waiting. Lying still, trying to ignore the branches creaking above you and the rustling in the underbrush. You hear something move. Maybe an animal, maybe not. Your heart races. You grip your rifle with hands that never quite unclench anymore. Sleep doesn't come easy. When it does, it arrives in short bursts. 10 minutes, maybe 20. No deep dreams. Just flashes of memory and fear stitched together with exhaustion. You wake up at every sound, every distant thump that could be a mortar or a falling fruit. One time it was just a monkey dropping a coconut. Another time, it was a man stepping on a mine. You lie awake and listen to the insects, the frogs, the distant howls, and the wind, always moving, always whispering things that sound almost like voices. Your imagination gets loud, too loud. You start hearing whispers that aren't there, a cough in the distance, a breath too close. You freeze, wondering if it's someone watching you, an American recon team, a deserter, something else. Sometimes it is someone. You've heard stories of infiltrators who crawled into camps and slit throats in the dark. You never saw it yourself, but you believe it. Because in this jungle, everything feels possible, especially the terrible things. And the darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's thick. You hold your hand in front of your face and see nothing. You walk the path by feel, one step at a time, trusting your feet more than your eyes. You follow the man ahead by the rhythm of his breath, the whisper of his sandals through the dirt. Lose that rhythm, and you're alone. Your unit moves at night often, safer from the bombers, but harder in every other way. You stumble over roots, slip down wet slopes. You try not to curse, not to cry out, not to grunt when your knee slams into a rock. Every sound could mean the end. You march silently, your world reduced to the next few steps. There are tricks to it. Tie white cloth to the man's pack ahead of you. Hold a stick and tap the ground ahead. Whisper once every minute, so the man behind knows you're still there. But it never feels safe. The darkness is too big, too loud in its silence. And then there are the flares. Every now and then, a plane overhead drops one. It falls slowly, swinging beneath a tiny parachute, burning white hot. Suddenly, the jungle is lit up like day. Every tree, every shadow, every soldier caught mid-step. You freeze. Everyone freezes. Not a breath, not a blink. You wait for the follow-up. The bombs, the strafing, the bullets. Sometimes nothing happens. The flare just burns out, leaving you blind again. Other times, it's a prelude. A searchlight, then the roar of jets. You dive, face first, heart hammering. You can't run. You don't dare. Running makes noise. You stay still and pray the trees are thick enough, the mud deep enough, the darkness kind enough. And if you're lucky, very lucky, you have a guide. One of the veterans who knows the trail by feel, who can walk blindfolded through a ravine and not step on a single twig. He doesn't speak, just points, gestures, and if he stops, you stop. If he crouches, you hit the ground. You don't question. You follow like your life depends on it, because it does. Even when you're not moving, the night is full of threats. Snakes hunt at night, so do panthers, if you're unlucky. One man swore he heard something breathing next to his hammock. He didn't sleep again for 3 days. The worst is the cold. The jungle holds on to heat during the day, but at night, it leaks away. You shiver inside your damp clothes. Your breath fogs. You huddle under your poncho and try to remember what warmth felt like. There's no dry blanket, no fire, just your pack, maybe a bit of tarp, and the smell of damp socks. And hunger doesn't care what time it is. Your stomach growls into the silence. You chew a bit of dried rice, barely edible, just to keep something in your belly. Once someone lit a match to find food in their bag. We never saw him again. Maybe he was just reassigned, but maybe not. You talk less at night, even among friends, even in whispers. The dark presses in too close. You save your stories for morning, if there is one, if you make it, because night is the hour of doubts. When you wonder if you'll ever get home, if your family remembers you, if this war even has an end, the jungle doesn't answer. It just rustles, drips, and sighs. And still, you wait. Eyes open, every sense stretched thin, listening, always listening, for footsteps, for danger, for the soft sound of dawn creeping through the canopy, because as terrifying as night is, what's worse is not hearing the morning birds. If the birds are silent, something's coming. You look down at the bicycle, it looks back at you, mocking. This thing, this Frankenstein's monster of rusted steel and bamboo lashings, is your only companion for the next 100 kilometers, and you don't even get to ride it. No one rides these bikes. That would be ridiculous. They call it a cargo bicycle, but that's generous. It's a regular French-era push bike, modified into a wheeled ox, reinforced frame, hand-whittled wooden supports. The seat's long gone. Who needs it? Instead, the central beam is piled high with sacks of rice, fuel cans, ammunition boxes, sometimes even broken down mortar parts lashed in bundles. Altogether, it weighs more than a grown man. Your job, push it, and it doesn't glide like it does in war movies. No gentle coasting through jungle trails. The wheels sink into mud, catch on roots, and wobble violently on rocky ground. Every few meters you have to adjust your grip, shift your weight, and brace your body like you're arm wrestling the earth. The handlebars bite into your palms, your shoulders burn. You curse under your breath with each shuddering push. These bicycles are legends in the making. Some say they carried over 300 kilograms at a time. Historians still argue whether that number was real or just propaganda. But when you're the one pushing, it feels real enough. You've seen men tie thick ropes to the front of the bike and pull it like a sled, digging in their heels like beasts of burden. And yet somehow, it's still more reliable than a truck in this terrain. Every slope is agony. Uphill, you lean your whole body forward, gripping the handlebars with white knuckles, pushing in short bursts, while your sandals skid on the rocks. Downhill, it's even worse. Now you're holding it back, not pushing it forward, digging your heels in and praying the weight doesn't roll over you. One mistake, and the whole load will flip, scattering rice, bullets, and maybe a tooth or two if you get in the way. Some men attach wooden brakes, chunks of tree root wedged against the tires with vines, but they burn out quick, literally. You've seen smoke pouring off a wheel like it was fleeing a fire. Others just use their feet. By the end of a downhill section, your soles are as smooth as polished leather, and your toenails, optional. Flat ground offers no break. The wheels still wobble, the mud still swallows the rims, and your arms still ache like you've been wrestling water buffalo. You develop a stoop, a hunch. The bike becomes a part of you, an extension of your suffering. You begin to think of it as a living thing, a stubborn, grumbling old man who only moves when you beg. But strangely, you grow attached. The bicycle is constant. It doesn't shoot at you. It doesn't argue. It doesn't complain. It just exists. Like you, inching forward no matter the weather, the bombs, or the leeches. You decorate it, add charms, wrap a lucky scarf around the handlebars. One man painted a tiny face on the front, like a cartoon animal. He said it helped him talk to it. No one laughed. There's a sort of honor in it. The Americans had helicopters, tanks, and trucks. You had a bicycle with wooden slats for a rack and twine for brakes. And yet your supplies got through. That's the part no one likes to admit. The bikes made it. Over the Trang Son mountains, through Laos, past the bombs and the ambushes, while roads were cratered and bridges were blown. These silent, groaning machines kept moving. Sometimes, when you reach a rest station, you lean your bike against a tree like a tired friend and sit beside it. Both of you dripping with sweat and grime. You share your rice ration with a fellow soldier and keep one eye on your gear. Not because you don't trust them, but because losing even a single sack might mean someone dies. The bicycle path has its own rules. You don't block it, you don't take shortcuts, unless you know they're safe. And you always help a comrade whose load has tipped. You've spent entire afternoons repacking a flipped bike, one sack at a time, in sticky mud, while planes circled overhead. You also get clever with repairs. A broken axle, bamboo reinforcement, a pop tire. You lash on strips of inner tube like a makeshift tread. You carry spare parts in pouches sewn to your pants. Someone in your unit is the unofficial bike doctor, and he can fix almost anything with wire, resin, and brute willpower. Of course, the Americans caught on. They started targeting bicycles, specifically ambushing columns, destroying way stations, laying traps on the routes most traveled. You heard about a raid where they found a cache of 20 bikes and blew them all up. The local commander wept, not for the gear. He cried for the bikes. Every bike lost meant 10 days of rebuilding. 10 days of someone hauling supplies on foot. 10 days closer to running out of ammo, medicine, or rice. That's the part that never gets written into textbooks. The war wasn't just fought with guns. It was fought with pushcarts. And sometimes, It worked the other way around. You found abandoned American equipment, a jeep stuck in the muck, a crate of food dropped by parachute, and you loaded it onto the bike. A luxury. Your bike creaked under the extra weight, but it held. It always held. When you reach your destination, you don't rest. You unload. You check the tires. You patch the bamboo rack with vine string. Then you wait for your next load. There's always another load, because the war doesn't pause, and neither do bicycles. Even years later, old veterans talk about those bikes with a strange affection, as if they were comrades, and in a way, they were. They never left your side. They never got promoted. They never wrote letters home. But they carried half the war on their back, and so did you. The trail wasn't just a highway of effort, it was a gauntlet of suspicion. You were taught to fear the enemy, of course, but out here, the enemy didn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes they wore the same sandals as you, carried the same rifle, even spoke the same dialect, and that's when things got complicated. You couldn't trust the trail, not just because of bombs or beasts or the elements, but because you didn't know who laid the path you were walking on. You'd heard stories that stuck in the back of your mind while walking alone in the dark. Saboteurs laying false markers, spies cutting guide ropes, men who wore your colors but whispered in American code when they thought no one was listening. That's where the booby traps came in. Not the American ones, though those were bad enough. These were yours, your own side, rigging parts of the trail with crude but effective traps. Not to stop invaders, but to stop traitors. You didn't talk about it. It wasn't in the briefings. But you saw the signs. A thin fishing line stretched across a path, a log that looked just a bit too deliberate, an odd patch of sand. If you were new, you might miss it. Step wrong, and then it was over. A snap, a pop, a scream, maybe not even a scream, just a thud, a splash, silence. Sometimes it was as simple as a sharpened stake in a pit. Other times, someone got creative, tripwire hooked to a grenade, concealed beneath leaf litter. If you were unlucky, it was a bamboo whip trap, a spiked branch bent back and anchored to a trigger, just waiting for a misstep. One moment you're walking, the next your thigh is split open like overripe fruit. And yes, your side made these. Not because they were cruel, because they were desperate. The Americans had infiltrators. So did the South Vietnamese. Even a single man feeding intel back across the border could lead to an airstrike, a raid, an entire squad erased. So command made the decision. Make the trail dangerous, even to your own. If you're here legitimately, you'll know where not to step. If you don't, you shouldn't be here. It made things tense. You second-guessed every branch. You stared at the ground for hours. You watched where the man ahead of you stepped and repeated it exactly, and you never strayed, not even to relieve yourself. The jungle wasn't just full of animals anymore, it was full of decisions, ones that could kill you for a misread twig. And sometimes, you got the job of planting those traps. They gave you a kit, wooden stakes, fishing wire, a few mines if you were lucky, old grenades, if you weren't. You and your squad would find a side route, maybe one recently compromised, and lace it with unpleasant surprises. It was strange work, quiet, meticulous. You'd spend hours carving points into bamboo poles, dipping them in something nasty, anything that might infect the wound. You planted them with surgical care, and all the while, you hoped you'd never have to walk this path again. No signs, no warnings. That was the point. These traps weren't to scare, they were to stop. You remembered where you put them, or at least you tried. But months later, the jungle grew back. Trails shifted. One rainstorm could turn a path into a swamp and back again. And then you forgot. That was the worst part. Forgetting your own traps. You heard about units who returned along an old path, only to set off their own handiwork. It wasn't all explosives and spikes, either. Sometimes the traps were psychological. Rumors spread. Whispers about certain routes being cursed. About strange deaths. About soldiers who vanished without a sound. You heard them at night, theories muttered from hammock to hammock, voices low as if the jungle itself might be listening. One man in your unit became obsessed with checking the ground. Wouldn't take a step without poking ahead with a stick. It slowed you all down, but no one complained. A few weeks earlier, his best friend had walked into a tripwire strung between two saplings. The explosion wasn't loud, but it left pieces of him hanging in the trees. After that, everyone took their time. You also learned to look for natural things. Leaves stacked neatly, rocks placed in odd shapes, even smells. Someone said if you smelled motor oil, run. That meant something mechanical was hidden nearby. A wire, a spring, a buried mine. Your nose became as important as your eyes. And then there were the false traps. Decoys set to confuse. You'd find a line, follow it to a fake charge, just an old tin can. Or you'd be warned of a danger ahead only to discover nothing at all. Were they jokes? Were they training? Were they warnings? No one knew, and after a while, no one cared. You just stepped carefully. Paranoia became normal. You stopped trusting that silence meant safety. You started watching your own comrades too closely, who lingered at the back of the line, who had a different kind of map, who asked too many questions. Suspicion spread faster than malaria. Even friendly camps weren't immune. Entry points were rigged with trip alerts. Guards carried passwords that changed daily, and if you didn't know the password, guns were raised first. Questions came later. You heard about one courier who was shot because he forgot the day's code word, a bullet to the chest for a memory lapse. And yet, through all of this, the trail worked. Somehow, the chaos had order. The traps kept out the spies. The silence kept the supply lines intact. And even when the jungle turned into a death maze, you walked through it because you had to. Because behind you was everything you left behind. And ahead, the promise of something worth walking toward. Even if you had to tiptoe past a mine to get there. Dinner, if you could call it that, was a cruel joke, played 3 times a day. If you were lucky enough to eat that often. The jungle didn't offer room service. The trail didn't come with a cafeteria. What you got was what you could carry, scavenge, or on miracle days, trade, and most of the time, that meant cold, wet rice, mashed into balls, the consistency of cement, wrapped in banana leaves, and aged to a soft grey-green. You didn't complain out loud. Everyone was chewing the same paste. Rice. Always rice. Sometimes with a sprinkle of salt. Sometimes just plain. If you were moving with a larger supply group, maybe you got a bit of dried fish or roasted peanuts, but those were reserved for important deliveries, which unfortunately rarely included you. You had to get creative. You learned what was technically edible. In the jungle, frogs were popular. Quick to catch and easy to cook. If you had time, fire, and weren't terrified of lighting it. You'd squat beside a muddy stream and spear one with a sharpened stick, roast it lightly on a smoldering vine, and eat around the bones. Not delicious, but warm. That made all the difference. You heard stories of men eating bark. You saw someone chew on a leather strap once, swore it tasted like soup. One unit caught a porcupine and feasted for 2 days. Another ate their pack mule. It wasn't supposed to happen. The mule was for hauling gear, not serving as a jungle buffet. But they'd run out of rice, and the poor beast had the misfortune of limping. You looked for fruit, of course. Bananas, if you found them, were snatched fast. Wild mangoes, sour and fibrous but heavenly. But you had to be careful. The jungle had a way of disguising poison as snacks. Someone once bit into what looked like a plum and spent the next 4 hours vomiting behind a tree, his skin turning the color of ash. After that, you asked before tasting, or you didn't eat it at all. Then there was jungle stew. Not an official term, just what everyone called it when someone got creative with a mess tin and the day's foraged scraps. Boil some water, if you had it. Throw in leaves, roots, maybe a bug or two. A pinch of salt. It was disgusting, but it was warm. Warmth went a long way when your teeth chattered at night. Meat. Rare. If someone managed to trap a bird, or club a civet, it was cause for celebration. You'd take turns chewing the smallest scraps. The skin, the bone marrow, even the claws. Nothing was wasted. You once watched a man suck the fat out of a jungle snail, like it was fine dining. And if the food wasn't dangerous, the water was. Clean water was a constant question mark. You carried iodine tablets, if you were lucky. If not, you boiled water in metal canisters over whatever flame you could manage, usually risking American aircraft spotting the smoke. Sometimes you didn't boil it at all. You just drank and hoped. And later, when the cramps hit, you curled up beside a log and waited for the pain to pass. Diarrhea was common. Dysentery too. Dehydration, while surrounded by rain, was a cruel irony you got used to fast. The medics, when you could find them, handed out charcoal pills and vague instructions. Drink more, they said. You nodded while squatting in mud, hoping your next sip wouldn't kill you. Food theft happened, but rarely. Not because people were kind, but because everyone knew the cost. If you stole someone's meal, you were shortening their life, and yours. If a patrol slowed down because someone was too weak to carry their pack, the whole group risked being spotted, bombed, or ambushed. So you rationed. Carefully, obsessively. You cut rice balls in half, then half again. You counted peanuts. You licked wrappers. And still, people starved, not emaciated skeletons overnight. But gradually, your belt tightened another notch. Your cheekbones stood out more. Your arms thinned. You started dreaming of food. Hot broth, a crust of bread, stir-fried pork, waking up to the smell of your own hunger. Letters from home didn't help. We sent you dried persimmons, one said. You never got them. Either intercepted, spoiled, or eaten somewhere along the trail by someone hungrier than you. You didn't blame them. Once, during a lull, you helped build a field kitchen. Bamboo poles, a rusted pot. You boiled rice with some jungle greens, added salt, and served tiny portions to a line of silent soldiers. No one thanked you. No one needed to. That pot of greenish mush was the closest thing to comfort you'd had in weeks. And then there was the odd, unforgettable day. A chicken, a real feathered, clucking chicken, wandering loose on the trail like some divine miracle. Caught, killed, shared between 8 people. You ate every part: meat, bones, feet, even the beak got boiled. You remember that taste even now. The crunch, the grease, the way your fingers stayed oily for hours. Historians talk about supply chains and logistics, but the truth was simpler. If the men on the Ho Chi Minh Trail stopped eating, the war stopped moving. And so they ate. Whatever they could, however they could. Just enough to take the next step. And if they couldn't find food, they found resolve. You walked on an empty stomach. You pushed bicycles on legs that trembled. You sang old songs quietly to keep your mind off the ache. You joked about jungle delicacies. Tonight, leaf soup with a hint of twig. And still, somehow, you made it through. You didn't really get sick on the trail. You got worse. Sickness wasn't something with a name and a prescription. It was a creeping presence, like the jungle itself. Always waiting, always testing. Always one scratch or mosquito bite away from knocking you out of the war entirely. Malaria was the biggest fear. Not bullets, not bombs. Malaria. It didn't announce itself dramatically. It started with a chill, maybe a headache. You'd think you were just tired. Then came the shivering, the fever so intense your skin steamed even in the rain. Your breath came in short, hot gasps. Your brain cooked. Your hands trembled so badly you couldn't hold a spoon, let alone a rifle. And there wasn't much help. Quinine was rare and precious. You didn't take it unless you had malaria, or unless you were in a unit that had connections. Most of the time, you were told to sweat it out, wrap yourself in every layer you had, lie on a mat of wet leaves, and shiver until the fever passed. Or didn't. There was one medic in your unit who swore by banana leaves. Wrap a feverish soldier tight like a spring roll. Keep them warm, keep them hidden, and hope. You remember watching him press his hand to someone's forehead, then mutter, "Maybe tomorrow." That was as much a diagnosis as anyone got. Other ailments were just as brutal. Jungle rot tore through feet and legs, turning skin into mush. Trench foot came next, soaking into your bones, making every step feel like wading through knives. Skin infections spread so fast it was like your sweat had turned into acid. A single blister could become a gaping sore in days, and all you had to treat it, a strip of cloth. Maybe some crushed herbs someone's grandmother had once sworn by. Toothaches were a quiet nightmare. There were no dentists. If you had an infected tooth, you either lived with the pain or pulled it yourself, with a knife, a stick, or a teammate's shaky hands. No anesthesia. just something to bite. You remember a guy who lost 2 teeth with nothing but a piece of bamboo clenched between his fists. He didn't scream, his eyes did. Then, there were the parasites, worms that lived in your stomach, lice that nested in your hair, things that burrowed into your skin and laid eggs. You stopped reacting after a while. You'd find something squirming under your armpit and just scrape it out with your fingernail like dirt. And still, you walked. Diarrhea was normal. Everyone had it. No one talked about it. You'd just see someone crouching beside the path, pale and shaking, trying to keep going. You drank dirty water and paid the price. The worst days were when you had to keep moving even while sick. Stomach gurgling, legs weak, mouth dry. You marched anyway. You had to. There was always one man in every unit with a medical bag. Not a doctor, usually just a kid who'd read a manual. He carried some bandages, alcohol, a few pills. He knew how to set bones, how to cauterize wounds with hot metal. You respected him more than any officer. Because when things went bad, he was the only thing standing between you and a slow, messy end. You remember him pulling shrapnel out of a man's thigh with a knife sterilized in fire. No morphine, just biting on a belt. The smell was awful. Burnt skin and blood, but the man lived. That counted as success. Sometimes you'd come across herbalists, old men or women who'd been pressed into service for the cause. They had knowledge, sure, but their medicine was old-world stuff. Decoctions, bark, roots, strange-smelling poultices. Did it help? Sometimes. Sometimes not. Historians still argue whether traditional remedies saved lives or just delayed the inevitable. But the most common medicine was superstition. You tied red string around your wrist to ward off spirits. You left offerings beside certain trees. You avoided places where too many had died. You didn't whistle at night, not because of enemy patrols, but because the dead might hear you and you couldn't afford any more ghosts on the trail. Rest wasn't part of the cure. Even sick, you moved. You were expected to. No one wanted to carry you, unless absolutely necessary. And if you were too slow, too weak, you stayed behind. You'd seen it happen. A man with a high fever, curled up under a tarp, waved his squad on, said he'd catch up later. He didn't. And death was quiet here. No last speeches. No funeral rites. You wrapped the body in leaves. Sometimes a hammock. You buried it if you could. If not, you hid it from the animals and the flies and kept walking. There was no time to mourn, no time to cry. You saved that for later, maybe, if you ever made it out. But the thing is, you adapted. You got used to pain. You grew numb to your own suffering. You learned to ignore the fever, to walk through the cramping, to sleep with open wounds. You stopped reacting when someone coughed blood. You offered a canteen, a nod, and moved on. And sometimes, the trail offered mercy, a moment of clean water. A day with no rain, a rest hut with a leftover can of antibiotics, its label long faded. You'd divide the pills carefully, half a dose per man, just enough to hope. You never got used to being sick, but you stopped expecting to be well. Illness became a state of being. It followed you like a shadow, always close, always waiting, but still, you walked, because on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, staying alive wasn't the goal. It was just the minimum requirement. The trail wasn't only above ground. Beneath the mud, the roots, and the moss-covered logs was a world of its own, tight, dark, and barely breathable. The tunnel networks weren't for tourists. They were for survival, for storage, for hiding, for the kinds of missions that didn't want footprints. You didn't volunteer for tunnel duty. You got assigned. And once you were down there, well, you weren't really a soldier anymore. You were part rat, part ghost, part whisper in the dirt. You moved on all fours, sometimes on your belly, inching through shafts barely wider than your shoulders. Your rifle didn't fit. Neither did your pack. You went in light, and you prayed. The air was the first thing you noticed. Thick, damp, full of the smell of wet soil, sweat, mildew, and sometimes something worse, something old. There wasn't enough oxygen. Breathing took effort. Talking wasn't even on the table. Every word cost you air you couldn't spare. The tunnels had everything. Kitchens, infirmaries, radio rooms. Some had bunk beds made from bamboo, dug into the walls like termite nests. There were trapdoors, escape hatches, dead ends that turned into storage pits. Others were wired with phone lines or echo tubes, so you could hear the movement of someone crawling 100 meters away. Some of these tunnels had been there since the fight with the French, expanded, rebuilt, reshaped. Others were brand new, dug overnight by entire units wielding spoons, sticks, and bare hands. You'd be surprised how fast you can build a tunnel when someone's dropping bombs on your head every hour. And they weren't just safe havens, they were weapons. Whole units would vanish into the jungle, dive into a tunnel, and pop up behind enemy lines like ghosts. Historians still argue whether these networks extended as far as Cambodia, or if that's just a legend whispered by old commanders with haunted eyes. Life down there wasn't quiet though. Rats lived there too. Big ones, bold ones. Sometimes they slept beside you, unbothered by your presence. Other times they chewed through your gear. One man woke to find his belt eaten clean off. Another swore a rat took his sock, and then came back for the other foot. Insects thrived. Ants, centipedes, spiders as wide as your palm. You couldn't swat them without disturbing the silence, so you let them crawl. Once, you shared a shaft with a nest of beetle. They didn't bite, but the sound, tiny legs skittering all around you in the dark, stayed with you for weeks. You lived with a strange kind of fear underground. Not the sharp terror of combat, but a slow creeping dread. The earth felt too close, like it might collapse at any moment, like it was breathing around you. You weren't claustrophobic when you entered the trail, but you were when you left it. You learned the rules quickly. Don't use fire. Don't cough. Don't sleep near the air vents. If American dogs caught your scent, they'd toss in grenades or gas. You kept supplies hidden behind fake walls. You marked tunnels with coded carvings, symbols only your unit understood. A triangle meant exit. A square meant trap. A spiral. Don't go that way. No one returns. Booby traps weren't just on the surface. Some tunnel segments were rigged to collapse. Others had false floors with spikes beneath them. Not for the enemy, for traitors, for the curious. You once saw a man open the wrong hatch and vanish into a pit so deep you never heard the splash. And yet, for all their horror, the tunnels were your best protection. When the bombers came, the tunnels held. When patrols searched the area, you lay motionless underground, listening to boots on the surface like distant thunder. You learned to feel vibrations. A man walking overhead was a whisper. A tank was a drumbeat. Food was stored down there. So were guns, water, and when needed, wounded soldiers. You crawled past a man once curled in a corner, feverish, bandaged with cloth, so damp it had grown moss. He didn't speak, he just blinked at you, eyes wide, lips cracked. You left him a ration of rice and kept crawling. The tunnels also held memories. Carvings on the walls, old helmets, sometimes bones. Not buried, just left. A kind of reminder that someone else had crouched here before you, that the trail didn't forget. One tunnel connected to a cave, deep and wide. Your squad camped there once, hidden for 3 days. You lit one candle, just one. The flame barely moved in the stillness. Someone told a story about a general who had lived in a cave for 2 years, his wife and son with him, surviving off roots and rainwater. No one knew if it was true, but it felt real. Down there, truth and myth blurred easily. And yes, sometimes you got stuck. The mud shifted. The tunnel narrowed. You pushed forward, hands scrabbling, ribs scraping the walls. You couldn't go back. Someone else was behind you. So you kept inching forward, lungs burning, fingers numb, trying not to scream. When you finally emerged, filthy and shaking, the air outside hit you like a slap. The space, the light, the sound of birds, even, it overwhelmed you, and you looked around like a newborn. The jungle had changed while you were under it. The war had moved on. You were late to your own life. But you made it. You crawled out. You survived the underworld. And then, without fanfare, you cleaned your hands, checked your rifle, and got back on the trail. Because the tunnel was just a detour, the real path still lay ahead. Out on the trail, you didn't always understand the people walking beside you. Literally, dialects changed with every region. Some of your comrades were from Hanoi, speaking the clipped formal accent of the north. Others came from deep in the Central Highlands, their language heavy with local slang or entirely different tongues. Some didn't speak Vietnamese at all. You marched with Lao porters, Cambodian scouts, and ethnic minorities from the hills. Khmer, Hmong, Jirai, Tay, and communication was interesting. Pointing, grunting, miming, and a sort of shared silence that filled the gaps. You became fluent in hand signals. A raised eyebrow could mean enemy ahead. A tapped finger might mean we're lost. The language of survival was wordless. No one judged you for how you spoke. Accents didn't matter. What mattered was whether you carried your weight and stayed quiet when it counted. Trust wasn't about conversation. It was about the man who handed you his last canteen, or the woman who pulled you out of a ditch during a raid. There was a strange beauty in that. Soldiers from all corners of the region, bound not by words but by purpose. The trail became its own kind of nation. No borders, just mud and mutual misery. You learned fast who to stick near. The Highlanders, for instance, knew the jungle like it was their backyard. You'd follow a Jirai scout through terrain that looked identical in every direction, and somehow she'd find a stream, a shortcut, a patch of safe ground. She wouldn't explain how, she'd just nod and keep walking. You respected that. You also learned not to question it. Food was shared across cultures. One unit might offer roasted bamboo shoots, another had dried buffalo meat, laced with more spice than your tongue could handle. You tried it all. Sometimes you regretted it. Sometimes it was the best meal of the month. Everyone had something different in their rations. Everyone learned to trade. And songs, strange, how songs bridged everything. One guy would start humming some old folk tune and soon 5 different accents were butchering the same chorus. You didn't sing well, no one did, but together it sounded okay, even comforting. You wrote letters in your own dialect. Poems, if you were lucky enough to still dream like that. But when you read aloud, you softened the words for others, tried to make your voice understandable to those who didn't grow up where you did. The trail didn't allow for selfish speech. Even jokes got translated, awkwardly, but with effort. A guy from Phan Hoa once told a story about a buffalo, a monk, and a mango. No one got it. But the way he laughed made everyone else laugh too. That was enough. But language barriers weren't just inconvenient. They could be deadly. A shouted warning in one tongue might not be understood in time. A misinterpreted order could send a whole squad down the wrong fork in the trail. So sometimes you just didn't talk. You made a plan with your eyes, with a gesture, with the sound of breath. And sometimes there was suspicion. Not everyone trusted outsiders. Whispers traveled. Was that man really with your unit? Why doesn't he speak Vietnamese? Why does he wander off at night? You never confronted anyone, but you kept your rifle closer. Just in case. Historians still argue whether the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a logistical miracle or a chaotic tangle barely held together by necessity. But if you walked it, you knew people held it together. People with different names for the same tree. People who didn't know your birthday, but who shared their last meal with you anyway. You remember one man, a soft-spoken cook from Southern Akhet, who couldn't pronounce half the squad's names, but he always managed to keep the fire hidden and the rice warm. He was a magician, until he wasn't. One night, during a bombing raid, his station was hit. You never found him, just the pot, still warm. Another time you got lost near a river bend. Your guide, a girl no older than 16, clicked her tongue 3 times. Somehow the man in front heard it, understood it, turned around. Wrong way, he mouthed. You never learned how those clicks worked, but they saved you. The trail changed how you saw difference. At first you noticed accents, skin tones, eyes shaped differently. Then you stopped noticing. All you saw were comrades. And when you marched, it wasn't with strangers. It was with people who had walked through the same rain, the same hunger, the same miles of mosquito-ridden hell. One day you reached a station where the guards spoke a dialect you couldn't understand at all. You mined hunger. One of them gave you a bowl of steaming rice porridge with dried fish. You nodded, grateful. He nodded back. That was the only exchange. No words, just mutual exhaustion and the gift of a hot meal. And even now, years later, you don't remember what they said. You remember how they looked at you, like family, like someone worth feeding, someone who had come far. That was the trail's magic. It turned 1,000 tongues into one heartbeat. You didn't stand a chance in a fair fight, not with what they had. The Americans brought tech that looked like it fell from space, sensors that detected your heat through the canopy, planes that dropped bombs guided by radar, motion-triggered mines that could distinguish animals from humans. And here you were, in sandals made from old tires. You adjusted the straps on your rubber slippers, as they were called, cut from discarded Goodyear tires, bolted together with bits of wire. Durable, yes. Waterproof, not really. Comfortable, not remotely. But they lasted. And when they didn't, you made another pair. There were whole squads who specialized in cutting and strapping these together, an army of cobblers in the jungle. Meanwhile, the Americans had boots, real boots, dry feet, clean socks, air-conditioned bases, with laundry facilities. You'd seen pictures of their rations: chocolate bars, canned peaches, hot meals in foil packages. You had sticky rice and frogs when lucky, and socks made from rags, wrapped in hope. They flew helicopters that could hover, listen, chase. You could hear them before you saw them, the thwop 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 of rotors cutting through the air like someone ripping up your day. You learned the sounds. Hueys sounded different from Chinooks. A single-engine plane might mean reconnaissance, a twin engine, bombs incoming. So you adapted. You moved at dusk, wore leaves on your helmet, packed your gear in green and brown. You smeared mud on your face, your arms, your rifle. You made fake trails with footprints leading the wrong way. You dragged branches to hide your real path. And if the plane started circling, you lay face down in the mud and didn't move. Not even to swat a mosquito drilling into your eyelid. There were stories of American people sniffers, machines that could detect the carbon dioxide from human breath. Whether they worked or not, no one knew. But the fear was real, so you dug deeper latrines. You buried your trash, your food scraps, even your sweat-soaked clothes. You boiled your water far from camp to keep the steam out of sight. Once, your unit camped near a stream. A patrol drone flew overhead, quiet, small, fast. The cook knocked over a pot. Steam rose. The drone circled back. 30 minutes later, the jungle exploded. Napalm. The heat was like a fist made of sun. You never saw the cook again, just his spoon, half melted, lodged in a tree. You learned that metal reflected sunlight, so you covered every buckle, every button. If you had a watch, you wrapped it in cloth. Your rifle, wrapped in vines. You weren't just hiding from enemies, you were hiding from the sky. Their radios could triangulate your signals, so you sent messages the old way. Runners, codes, sometimes even fireflies. One group was famous for sending signals with flashlights pointed through green cloth. The light couldn't be seen from the air, but it still reached the next station, jungle Morse code. And still, the bombs came. Precision-guided, laser-guided, guided by nothing but bad luck. You walked past craters filled with shattered bicycles and burned boots. You found parachutes tangled in trees, bright white nylon, waving like surrender flags that no one had time to raise. And yet, you kept walking, because while the Americans had technology, you had something harder to beat. Silence, patience, and an intimate relationship with suffering. You didn't need roads. You didn't need radios. You didn't even need shoes, sometimes. A man in your unit once walked 30 kilometers barefoot after his sandals melted in a fire. He wrapped his feet in banana leaves and marched. You asked him if it hurt. He shrugged. Less than sitting still. Historians still argue whether the Americans ever understood the trail, how it moved, how it breathed, how it outsmarted every new tool thrown at it. They had sensors, drones, spy planes. You had bamboo, mud, and time, and somehow, you won. You remember finding a broken motion sensor once, hidden near a supply drop, a little black box with a wire snapped off. You poked it with a stick. Nothing happened. You laughed, your first laugh in days. Then you buried it under a termite mound and kept walking. It wasn't just a war of weapons. It was a war of endurance. They had helicopters. You had hammocks. They had air-conditioned bunkers. You had tree cover and guts. And when it rained, and it always rained, you realized that no technology in the world could stop a man willing to walk barefoot through hell, carrying a sack of rice. And in those rare moments when you caught glimpses of their tech-captured radios, leftover gear, even a cigarette with English printed on the wrapper, you felt a kind of grim pride, because while they had all this, you were still here, still walking, still breathing through mud, still pushing forward on sandals that should have fallen apart weeks ago. And the jungle, it was on your side. It swallowed their gear, crushed their trucks, hid your footsteps. It respected quiet, and you had become very, very quiet. So you kept going, past their satellites, their night vision goggles, their fancy boots, because sometimes the sharpest weapon is simply being too stubborn to stop. You wrote when you could. Scraps of paper, backs of ration wrappers, the torn edge of a map, anything flat and dry enough to hold your words. A twig dipped in ink made from crushed berries. A stub of pencil, sometimes charcoal. You folded the letter carefully, stuffed it into your sock or the lining of your pack, and hoped it would make it out. And most of them didn't. The trail didn't have a mail service. No postman hiked the jungle to collect your words and dreams. There were couriers, young boys or women who ran between stations, dodging bombs and snakes with a bag full of sealed hopes. But they only came when the weather allowed, and if a bridge was blown, or a supply cache was hit, those bags went up in flames. Whole months' worth of letters, burned to ash before anyone ever read them. You tried to keep writing anyway, to your parents, your younger brother, a girl back home whose name was still folded inside your shirt pocket. You didn't write about the war, not the real war. You didn't talk about the smell of rot, the sound of bombs, the way someone coughed blood beside you last night. You said things like, "We are well," or "The weather is challenging, but morale is high." Everyone lied in their letters, because what else could you do? Write the truth? That you were hungry, soaked, sick and scared, that you hadn't had dry socks in 3 weeks, and the guy in your hammock the night before was now a stain on the forest floor. No, you spared them, and maybe you spared yourself too. The ones you did receive were like gold, passed hand to hand until they reached your camp. Someone would walk up, call your name, and hand you a folded square, creased and sweat-stained. You'd read it 100 times in silence, each line memorized like scripture. One soldier in your unit had a letter from his mother. He kept in a bamboo tube to protect it from the rain. He hadn't received another in months. He said it didn't matter. He read that one every night, like a bedtime story for grown men carrying rifles and rice. But mostly, you didn't get replies. You sent things into the dark and heard nothing back. And you told yourself it was just delays. You didn't let yourself imagine the other reasons. Sometimes the letters didn't even make it into the mailbag. They were tucked into the trunks of trees, hidden in waterproof tubes, buried beside rest stops. One day, someone might find them. After the war, maybe you passed through villages, 2 tiny settlements on the edge of the jungle, where life kept going. Chickens wandered across the trail. Children stared, not afraid, just curious. Sometimes the elders would let you wash in a stream, give you a bowl of porridge, and sometimes they'd take your letters, promise to send them north with the next rice trader. You wanted to believe them. Every letter was a time capsule, a frozen version of you, before the rot, before the fever, before the trail changed you. You'd sign them with care, your full name, your unit if you dared, a little phrase like "please write soon," and then seal it like you were sealing a piece of your own skin. You heard about letters being intercepted, American patrols finding them and laughing. You tried not to think about that. The idea of your most private thoughts being passed around a foreign campfire, mispronounced and mocked, made your stomach twist. But even then you kept writing, because some part of you believed that words mattered, that your voice, even through paper, still reached home. And sometimes it did. Rarely, but it happened. A letter got through. Someone in your squad received a reply from their father. A small note. We are proud of you. Be safe. The harvest was good this year. You watched that soldier reread it 5 times in one sitting, a ghost of a smile creeping across his cracked lips. Some of the best letters weren't written to send, they were written just to survive. You'd pour out everything, anger, grief, love, boredom, and then fold it up and tuck it deep into your pack. A secret between you and the trail. If you died, maybe someone would find it. Maybe they'd understand. There was one man who carried a notebook. Not for orders, not for maps. Just to draw, leaves, birds, the way the mist clung to the tree trunks. He never said much. But when he died, they found pages filled with jungle sketches, and in between them, tiny notes. Tell my brother, I'm okay, don't worry, I'm not cold, I miss home. No one knew if he ever mailed anything, but it felt like he had. And sometimes, in the darkest nights, you imagined your letters making it. You pictured your mother at the kitchen table, holding the page in both hands, lips pressed together, reading the same line over and over. You pictured someone saying your name out loud, saying it like you still existed beyond the vines, the mud, the silence. The war didn't leave much of you behind. But maybe, somewhere in a drawer, there's a folded letter with your handwriting, and maybe that's enough. Women walked the trail too. Not many talk about them, not in textbooks, not in victory speeches, but they were there, marching, sweating, bleeding, beside the men. They carried supplies, they carried rifles, they carried stretchers, secrets, and sometimes even the wounded. You first noticed them not by their voices, which were often as quiet as yours, but by the way they moved, determined, balanced, unflinching under weight that would buckle most shoulders. A girl half your size could haul as much rice as you, maybe more. You'd see her ahead on the trail, bent forward guiding a bicycle weighed down with mortar rounds, her face calm, unreadable, streaked with mud. They weren't just support. Some were medics, skilled with herbs, quick with a suture needle, steady when the blood wouldn't stop. Others were couriers. They slipped through the jungle with coded messages tied around their waist, past patrols and sensor traps, and all the same dangers as everyone else. And some fought, not often on the front lines, but it happened, especially when the trail was ambushed. You remember one ambush where a young woman, maybe 17, stood over a fallen comrade with her rifle, firing into the trees until her clip ran dry. She never said a word the rest of the march. They didn't ask for special treatment. There was no room for it anyway. You all slept in the same jungle, ate the same rotten rice, swatted the same mosquitoes, suffered the same trench, foot in fevers. There wasn't a women's version of the war. There was just the war. But still, things were different. You noticed the extra layer of care they took to guard their privacy. When stopping for the night, a few branches were always arranged into a small shelter, half wall, nothing fancy, just enough space to change a shirt or wash, if there was water. You kept your eyes away, not out of politeness, but because shame had no room in a place this cruel. You never talked about it openly, but everyone understood they were fighting 2 wars, one against the Americans, and one against everything the jungle threw at their bodies. No hygiene products, no clean water, no privacy, and still they marched. One woman in your unit, everyone just called her Chi, older sister, had a voice like rain on dry leaves, soft, constant. She sang old folk songs while walking, not loudly, just enough for those nearby to hear. Her presence made you feel like for a second the trail wasn't trying to kill you. Chiti could splint a leg in 2 minutes flat, could cook a pot of stew with barely any ingredients, could calm a soldier screaming through fever dreams with just a hand on his chest and a whispered lullaby. And then the next day she'd be hauling gas cans up a ridge in the rain. You don't know what happened to her. One morning she wasn't there. Maybe she got reassigned, maybe not. No one asked. That was the rule on the trail. There were others. A radio operator who never looked up from her set. A demolitions expert with shrapnel scars on her arms and no patience for anyone's excuses. A nurse who once carried a wounded soldier 3 kilometers on her back after a mine went off. The men in her squad tried to help. She refused. Said she'd trained for this. You heard stories from farther south. Women who crawled into tunnels with knives in their teeth, who poisoned water supplies, laid traps, guided entire battalions through terrain no man dared enter. Whether the stories were true didn't matter. You believed them. One day, after weeks of rain, your unit stumbled upon a way station deep in the jungle. It was run entirely by women. They greeted you without a smile, just hand signals, and a steaming pot of water. They boiled your socks. They patched your boots. One of them sat beside you, cleaned the mud from a cut on your calf, and said, "This one will scar nicely." You didn't know her name, but you remember that moment more clearly than any gunfight. Historians still argue whether women on the Ho Chi Minh Trail were combatants or just helpers. But you knew better. They were the backbone, the hands that kept the supply lines alive, the ones who never hesitated, who cried silently at night and rose the next morning to push another bicycle through another swamp. And when the trail grew too steep, too dangerous, too cruel, they were still there. One woman, soaked to the bone, once told you, "If I stop, who carries what I carry?" She wasn't talking about the gear. There's a monument somewhere, long after the war, with names etched in stone. A few of them are women's names. Not nearly enough. Most are just gone, buried under jungle and silence. But you remember them. The girl with the singing voice, the medic with the steady hands, the courier who ran faster than fear. They were never invisible. You just had to be paying attention. There were places on the trail where the air changed, where it turned thick, heavy, and wrong. You didn't know why at first. Then the smell hit you. Death. Not the dramatic kind. Not fresh. Not loud. Not even obvious. Just a slow, sweet rot that clung to the back of your throat like smoke. You knew it wasn't an animal. The jungle made you an expert in that. This was something else. Something human. You didn't see the bodies, not right away. The jungle did its work. Vines curled around limbs, leaves blanketed bones. Insects and weather made quick business of anything left unburied. But you knew. A boot, half sunk in mud, a rust-colored stain on bark, a helmet bent the wrong way. The signs were there, if you dared to look. Sometimes, the corpses were too fresh to ignore, caught in a bombing, or ambushed, or just left behind because no one could carry them. You tried not to stare. You tried not to imagine the face before the silence. You failed. Everyone did. The jungle didn't allow proper funerals. No incense. No headstones. If there was time, you buried them shallow, wrapped in hammocks or ponchos. If not, you covered them with leaves and hoped the animals would stay away long enough for someone else to find them. Someone who still had the energy to care. And yet, you got used to it. That's the most disturbing part. You stopped reacting. You'd pass a site with the faint smell of decay, and your only thought would be, "Not ours." That was the line. If it wasn't your unit, you didn't stop. You couldn't afford to. Some nights you swore the jungle was full of ghosts. You'd feel watched. Not by the enemy, not even by animals. Just watched. One man in your unit refused to sleep under trees after a night like that. Said he felt breathing above him. You all laughed. But after that, more than one person started hanging their hammocks lower to the ground. Superstition became comfort. You made little rituals. Tied red thread around your wrist. Tapped your helmet 3 times before every march. Never said the name of the dead out loud. You didn't want them following you. There was a part of the trail near a ravine. Locals said it was cursed. Too many ambushes had happened there. Too many patrols went missing. One squad returned with only half its men, and none of them could explain what happened. You rerouted around it after that, added 2 days to the journey. No one complained. Historians still argue whether the high casualty spots on the trail were avoidable or just the price of a logistical miracle. But to you, they were landmarks. Places you passed quickly, quietly, with your breath held and your heart low. Sometimes you found personal things, letters, a family photo, stained and torn, a metal spoon with a name scratched into the handle, a diary, its pages stuck together with mildew. You didn't take them. You weren't a thief. You just looked, and then you left them where they were. Ghosts deserve their relics. You heard stories of entire stretches of trail littered with the dead after B-52 runs, bodies half buried by debris, limbs sticking out like roots. After a while, the jungle reclaimed them, vines, moss, silence. That's what the trail did. It didn't preserve, it absorbed. But the worst part, the familiarity. You started recognizing places by who died there. This was where Tan fell. This is where the medic got hit. This is where we buried the courier. Memory and geography blurred. One day, you passed a clearing that looked like any other. Then you saw the bamboo cross barely held together, tilted at an angle. No name, just cloth tied around it. Probably someone from another unit. Maybe someone you'd passed on the trail a few weeks earlier. You bowed your head, said nothing, and walked on. You couldn't carry the grief. It was too heavy. Heavier than your pack, heavier than your rifle. If you let it sit on your shoulders, it would pin you to the mud. So you learned to store it, tuck it into a corner of your mind, and step forward. There were moments when the weight came back. A smell, a sound, the way sunlight hit a leaf, just so. And suddenly, you were remembering. Suddenly, you were back there, with the flies, and the silence, and the sinking knowledge that you were standing in someone's last footprint. One guy started talking to the dead, quietly, at night. "I hope you got out," he'd whisper. "I hope your mother doesn't think you were a coward." No one teased him. We all understood. And somehow, amid all this, you still moved. The trail didn't stop for ghosts. It didn't pause for memory. You stepped around death like it was a tree root, a part of the path. And in a way it was, because the trail was paved not with stones but with the names of those who couldn't finish it. They told you the safe zones were safe, that if you reached a rest station, a supply depot, a concealed jungle bunker, you could finally breathe. But these places were protected, camouflaged, reinforced with bamboo and secrecy. And sometimes that was true, just long enough for you to believe it. Then the bombs would come. You never knew when the enemy found out. Maybe a plane spotted the campfire smoke. Maybe someone talked. Maybe a sensor picked up too many heartbeats in one place. But when they hit like they'd known you were there for weeks. One minute you're boiling rice over a whisper-thin flame, soaking your feet in a stream, scribbling a letter in a corner of your notebook. The next minute, thunder, ground shaking, trees cracking like lightning. You hit the dirt before your brain catches up. Ears ringing, nose full of smoke. The fire's gone, the rice is gone, so is half the shelter. You scramble to grab your pack, not because it's precious, but because your life is in there, your food, your medicine, your only pair of semi-dry socks. You don't think, you react. You've done this before. The so-called safe zones were little more than good guesses, a dip in the landscape, a thick patch of trees, a cave if you were lucky. But the enemy had maps. They knew your routes. They knew where rest made sense. And so, rest became the most dangerous part of the trail. One outpost, beautiful little camp tucked beside a waterfall, clean and quiet, was hit in the middle of the night. Napalm. There was no warning, no flares. Just the sudden whoosh of fire ripping down from the sky. In the morning, you passed through what was left, scorched hammocks, melted cans, a burned sandal still smoldering in the mud. No bodies, just ash. After that, everyone got twitchier. You stopped sleeping deeply, even in secure zones. The guards doubled. You buried anything shiny. No one made noise if they could help it. No singing, no stories, not even jokes. You built bunkers into the hillsides, dug deep, covered them with tree branches and silence. Sometimes they worked. You'd be inside, the earth above your head rumbling with nearby strikes, the walls shaking but holding. You'd sit shoulder to shoulder in the dark, counting seconds between impacts, breathing through your shirt to keep calm. Other times, the bombs found the roof, and the jungle didn't always cooperate. A supply base built on high ground might seem smart, until it rained and turned the slope into a landslide. You'd wake up with mud in your ears, your rations sliding down into a gully, your boots nowhere to be found. Even when things were quiet, the safe places weren't restful. They were crowded, hot, swarming with insects. You'd arrive hoping for relief and find a queue for water, half a meal, and a hammock space that sloped downward, just enough to make sleep impossible. But they felt safe. That was the trap. You let your guard down. You stopped checking your rifle every hour. You took off your sandals, hung your shirt to dry, maybe even laughed at something. That was usually the moment the noise started again. A buzz overhead, a distant pop or worse, no sound at all before the sky cracked open. Historians still argue how secure the trail's infrastructure really was. How many bunkers, how many base stations, how many were hit versus how many survived. But to you, numbers didn't matter. All you remembered were the ones you lost. There was a girl at one depot, ran the kitchen, tiny, quick, always humming while stirring watery porridge. You ate 2 meals at her station before it vanished in a bombing raid. No one ever found her. The only thing left behind was her ladle, snapped in half. You stopped asking names after that. Some camps weren't destroyed by bombs, but by airdrops of supplies intended for your enemies. Mistakes, miscommunication, or maybe sabotage. One day, a unit down the trail received crates labeled for the South Vietnamese. Uniforms, rations, even propaganda leaflets, fluttering through the trees. You burned it all, quietly, carefully. That night you heard engines overhead. You started rotating the camps more often. Pack everything up, move 10 kilometers west, then 15 east, set up again. This helped, sometimes, but every relocation was another chance to lose something. A cache of medical supplies, a beloved pot, a handmade tool someone had carried for months. And the idea of rest itself began to feel foreign. You'd reach a safe zone, and your shoulders wouldn't drop. Your hands still gripped your pack like it might float away. Your eyes never stopped scanning the canopy. Even when you closed them, your ears stayed open. Eventually, you began treating every stop like a pit stop in a race. Get in, eat fast, dry your gear, clean your rifle, refill your canteen, sleep if you can, but sleep light. The trail doesn't reward those who relax. And yet, despite the fear, you still hoped. You reached each zone thinking, maybe this one will be quiet. Maybe tonight, I won't wake up to fire. Maybe we'll eat something warm that isn't rice. Sometimes you did. Sometimes, for a single evening, the trail let you rest. And you never trusted it. Most of the time, you never fired your weapon. It stayed strapped to your back, wrapped in oilcloth, covered in mud and silence. You weren't marching to fight. You were marching to move. Bullets weren't the currency out here. Endurance was. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a battlefield. It was the bloodstream. Your job wasn't to storm bunkers or charge lines. It was to get things from A to B, to carry rice, ammo, messages, fuel, men, sometimes the wounded, sometimes the dead. Fighting was rare. When it happened, it was fast, confusing, and usually over before you even chambered a round. But that didn't mean it was peaceful. The enemy was always there. You just couldn't see them. You fought the fear more than you fought the Americans. The sudden snap of a twig, a glint in the foliage, a silence too quiet. That's what put your finger on the trigger. You were trained to kill, but on the trail, survival mattered more. If shots were fired, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Most engagements were ambushes, brief, chaotic explosions of sound in an otherwise quiet jungle. 1 second, you're walking. The next, you're on the ground, returning fire into trees you can't even see properly. And then, just as fast, it ends. The enemy disappears. You count heads. Sometimes you count less than you started with. You fired mostly to cover, to run, to grab someone's arm and drag them behind a fallen log, while bullets shredded the leaves above your head. Accuracy wasn't the point. Surviving the next 60 seconds was. Sometimes it wasn't Americans. It was South Vietnamese units, or Laotian mercenaries, or scouts working in the dark. You never knew for sure. They wore no uniforms you could see. You didn't wait for questions. If someone shot first, you shot back. One ambush lasted only 20 seconds. Maybe less. a crackle of gunfire, 2 grenades, a tree exploded. When the smoke cleared, you were down a man and had burned through half your ammo pouch. You dug a shallow hole for him that night. You used your mess tin as a shovel. Historians still debate how much actual fighting happened on the trail compared to what was imagined by American commanders. They dropped millions of tons of bombs, expecting huge military formations, rows of soldiers in step. But you knew better. Most of you were part of the invisible war, the logistical war, the crawling, sweating, sickened, starving part. You didn't wear bright uniforms. You didn't march in columns. You slipped between trees, like ghosts. If you had to fight, something had gone off script. That didn't stop you from preparing. You cleaned your rifle obsessively. Every night you broke it down with trembling fingers, wiped it dry, reassembled it. Sometimes it was all you could do to feel in control. You couldn't stop the rain. You couldn't stop the fever, but by God, your rifle would work. You trained in silence. A twig snapped too loudly. You flinched. A metal buckle scraped a rock. You glared at the culprit. Noise got people killed, so you learned to move like fog, light on your feet, breath shallow, fingers always curled near the trigger, even when you hoped you'd never need it. When you did fire, the adrenaline was something else. Not exciting, not heroic, just pure panic, wrapped in sound, muzzle flash lighting up green shadows, leaves ripping apart, a scream you couldn't tell was from your side or theirs. You aimed at movement, you didn't aim at faces. You could. Then, quiet. Always quiet again, after, like the jungle was holding its breath. Afterward, you dealt with the aftermath. A torn uniform, a bleeding arm, maybe worse. You tied bandages with your teeth. You dragged someone over your shoulder, whispering, "It's okay," when you both knew it wasn't. And sometimes you didn't get to fire at all. You heard the gunshots in the distance. You got there too late. You found blood, shell casings, boot prints, and silence. You cleaned up what was left. You reported it, and then you walked on. But here's the truth. Most of your war wasn't about bullets. It was about distance. The sheer act of getting there, of delivering your load, of surviving just one more night with your rifle slung across your back, wondering if today would be the day you finally had to use it. And that uncertainty, that not knowing when the war would stop being silent, was its own kind of battle. The radio crackled once, just a tiny hiss, and you knew something had gone wrong. It wasn't supposed to make noise. You kept it off, unless absolutely necessary. Too risky, too loud, too traceable. But today, someone had turned it on, maybe for just a second too long. Radios were precious. Heavy, fragile, and almost always outdated. But they were also vital. That was the trade-off. With them, you could report airstrikes, request supplies, warn about enemy movement. Without them, the trail was blind. So someone always carried one, wrapped in cloth, buried in the middle of a pack, like a newborn. You remember the rules. Speak softly, use code, keep the transmission short, move immediately after. The Americans had ears in the sky. Triangulation systems, radio direction finders. If you stayed on the air more than a few seconds, they'd know, not your name, not your voice, but your location. So you learned to whisper across frequencies. You spoke in riddles. The buffalo is thirsty meant supplies needed. The rain is late meant delay. The field is quiet meant the enemy had moved. You didn't use names, didn't use numbers, didn't say over, you didn't even say out. Some units got creative, tapped code through wire lines strung between trees, or used flash signals, mirrors, colored cloth, light through bamboo tubes. A few old-timers swore by bird calls. You never figured out if they were serious. But the radio was power. It could summon help or death. Once, your unit set up a temporary base deep in a valley. Someone sent a message. Too long, too clear, too optimistic. 20 minutes later, the sky howled. Artillery rained down like it had been waiting in the clouds. You all dove. Some didn't get back up. When you found the radio later, it was still on, sizzling with heat, as if ashamed. From then on, Radio use was handled by one man, always the same one. He had a voice like sand and hands that never shook. He didn't talk, he listened. Every few days he'd string up a wire between trees, sit in the mud, and wait. If the signal came through, he wrote it down on a strip of bamboo. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the air just hissed back. He carried a pistol, not for the enemy, but for the radio. If it looked like you were about to be overrun, he'd shoot the set, smash the battery, bury the pieces. Better to lose a message than reveal a position. You respected that. You also feared it. Because information was the one thing you couldn't carry on your back. It had to move faster than feet, faster than bicycles, faster than jungle whisper networks. And when it worked miracles. A rerouted supply drop, a warning about an ambush, a rare moment of coordination that saved lives. And when it failed, people died. And they died confused. You saw it happen more than once. A unit expected backup. It didn't come. The message had been delayed, jammed, misread, and so they held their position too long, waiting for help that was never on the way. You started to fear silence as much as noise, because silence on the radio didn't always mean safety. It meant maybe. It meant something's wrong. It meant someone might be listening, or no one might be listening at all. Historians still argue how advanced the US signal interception tech really was, how much they truly heard, whether they understood the codes. But for you, it didn't matter. You acted like every message was being read by a man in a headset somewhere above, circling in a plane, pen hovering over a map, ready to call in death. So the messages got shorter. Turn east. Bad rice. 2 shadows. You learned how to say everything without saying anything. One man you knew, he called himself Men, though it wasn't his name, used birds as code. He'd send word that the swallow has landed, or the heron is hungry. It drove everyone nuts, but it worked. The Americans didn't decode birds. He died in a raid. Afterward, no one could figure out what the crane sleeps standing was supposed to mean. Maybe it was just a joke. Some units tried to replace radios entirely. Carrier pigeons, handwritten scrolls passed between bike riders, even trained dogs. You met one once, carried on a leash by a scout. The dog wore a pouch around its neck and growled if anyone but its handler got too close. But nothing beat the speed of airwaves, except the danger of them. You learned to listen first, to feel the change in the air when a message was about to be sent. A stillness, a tension, a hush that crept through the trees like mist. Then the faintest click, a whisper, then silence again. Everyone would freeze for a few heartbeats, waiting. And when nothing came, you moved, fast. You left no trace. You covered the radio's tracks with leaves and lies. If someone found the site, they'd think it was just another abandoned camp, not the nerve center of a ghost army slipping through the jungle. Because the trail wasn't just physical, it was mental. It lived in sounds, in codes, in hisses and pulses, and words never meant to be understood by outsiders. And in the end, it didn't matter whether the radio brought help or hurt. You used it anyway, because silence could kill you just as fast. You became good at burying things, not just bodies or fires, but evidence, tracks, smells, trash, yourself. The trail demanded it. Every step you took, every crumb you dropped, could give you away. And the Americans were watching, with satellites, planes and men on the ground who knew how to read a bent leaf like it was a map. So you buried your fires, dug deep pits, burned rice over coals so faint they barely glowed, covered them with green leaves, vented smoke through holes that twisted sideways under moss and dirt. Sometimes you didn't light fires at all. Cold rice, again, because warmth left a scent. Even your latrines had rules. Dig far from camp. Cover immediately. Mark with sticks only your squad would understand. You were feeding yourself and hiding yourself, simultaneously, and the jungle kept your secrets, if you were careful. But when you weren't, it remembered. One night, a scout left behind a tin can, empty, clean, forgotten in the dark. The next morning, a reconnaissance patrol passed through. The can glinted. An hour later, the sky split open. Airstrike. You never found that scout again. You remembered the shape of the can, how harmless it had looked. From then on, you buried everything. Food wrappers, broken sandals, cigarette butts. You stopped carving your name into trees. You stopped picking flowers. You stopped acting like you had ever existed before the trail. You wrapped your rifle in leaves, coated it in mud to break the shine, did the same to your cheekbones. Your dog tags were muffled in cloth, or left behind entirely. If you got caught, they didn't want your name tied to anything, not even you. Camouflage became an art. Your uniform wasn't just green, it was stained with weeks of sweat and moss, colored by the jungle itself. You braided ferns into your pack. You wove palm fronds into your helmet. You moved like a shadow, pretending to be a breeze. Some squads took it further. They built false trails, broke branches just enough to lead pursuers the wrong way, dug fake latrines, set decoy fires with damp logs and green leaves to create just enough smoke to bait a bomb. You never knew if they worked, but it made you feel smart, and sometimes that was enough. Historians still debate how much the Americans really saw from the sky. The jungle canopy was thick, but not impenetrable. They dropped sensors, metal listening posts disguised as tree debris. You'd find them sometimes, half buried, blinking softly, listening for vibrations, for movement, for breath. You dug them up and smashed them with rocks, or wrapped them in vines and tossed them into rivers. There were dogs too. They sniffed for sweat, for oil, for fear. So you rubbed yourself with crushed garlic, charcoal, river mud, anything to confuse their noses. One man used fish guts once. It worked, but he didn't make many friends after that. You learnt the rhythm of concealment. Wake, check your surroundings, cover your tracks, hide your waste, burn only what you can't carry. You carried ash in your pockets to scatter over fresh prints. You left no boot marks, only whispers. Even your resting positions were buried. You didn't sleep on trails, you slept off them, 20 meters into the brush, under leaves. Hammocks strung low, camouflaged with mosquito netting smeared with mud. You once woke up to find your own shelter gone, blended so well into the ground, even you couldn't see it at first. You started to forget what it felt like to not hide, to stand upright without flinching, to cough without covering your mouth, to laugh out loud. One time, someone did laugh, something about a monkey stealing a hat. He clapped his hands. Everyone froze. No one said anything, but the look was enough. He didn't laugh again. Even your wounds had to be hidden. Blood got buried. Bandages burned. If someone died and there was time, you dug deep. If there wasn't time, you covered them in leaves, moved on, and prayed they wouldn't be found. You thought a lot about footsteps, yours, theirs. How loud they sounded when everything else was so quiet. You learned to walk on the edges of your feet, to step on roots, not soil, to move like an animal that knew it was being hunted. You started to smell the jungle like a dog. You noticed when something was off, freshly broken twigs, the scent of gun oil, a cough on the wind that didn't belong to anyone in your squad. That's when you knew to disappear. Disappearance was your best weapon. You didn't need firepower if they couldn't find you. You didn't need strength if you left no scent. You didn't need numbers if you left no echo. If they dropped napalm and no one was underneath it, did the fire even count? And that was the quiet pride of it. The Americans had eyes in the sky. Maps, machines, satellites. You had dirt, leaves, silence. And somehow you still won, because they were trying to find an army. But what they got was a whisper. There were no medals on the trail, no parades, no flags flapping proudly in jungle wind. Just sweat, just silence. And if you were lucky, someone nodding at you after a job done without collapsing. Recognition didn't exist out here, not the kind you read about in stories. No one wrote your name in a dispatch. No one came by to shake your hand or pin a badge on your chest. You moved quietly, you delivered what you carried, and then you disappeared back into the green. You kept track of your own victories. A full load delivered without losing a sack, a wounded comrade brought back alive, a river crossed during flood season, without anyone drowning. You didn't brag about it. You just remembered it. Quietly, like a private coin you didn't want to spend. One guy in your unit kept tally marks on the inside of his sandal straps. Not for kills, for deliveries. Rice, ammo, letters. He had nearly 100 marks. When the sandal wore out, he cut the strap off and kept it in his pack. That was his medal. Sometimes, someone from high command would visit, briefly. You'd see their boots, polished, out of place in the mud. They'd ask a few questions, smile for a photo, and disappear back to wherever people had dry clothes. You didn't resent them, not really, but you didn't listen to them either. The jungle didn't care about rank. Praise, when it came sideways. Someone offered you the last bite of rice. Someone let you sleep first. Someone asked you to lead the next march. Not because you were the best, but because you'd proven you wouldn't break. The real honors were smaller. Someone remembered your name. Someone trusted you with the map. Someone said, "We wouldn't have made it without you," while tightening a sandal strap or loading a bike. Historians later tried to piece together who did what, who hauled which load, who fought where, but the trail didn't keep clean records. It kept mossy footprints and shallow graves. It honored the anonymous. You sometimes daydreamed of being remembered. Maybe a statue, maybe a story in a schoolbook, but even that felt distant, unreal. You were part of something massive, yes, but your part was so narrow, so muddy, and sleep-deprived, it felt invisible. Once, someone painted a name on a rock wall. Just a name. No dates, no details. Dan was here. That was the closest thing to a monument you ever saw. A week later, it was covered by vines. And yet, you still carried pride. Not loud, but deep. You knew what you'd done, what you'd survived. The bombs, the sickness, the jungle, the hunger, the fear. You hadn't run. You hadn't abandoned your load. You had become part of the trail, and that meant something, even if no one wrote it down. Once, a photographer passed through your unit. He was from the capital. Clean clothes, shiny boots, a camera that looked too delicate for this world. He asked you to pose. You didn't smile. You just looked into the lens and held your pack. Weeks later, someone said they saw your photo in a newspaper. You never saw it, but part of you hoped they'd at least spelled your name right. You heard rumors of awards given posthumously, families getting medals, certificates, little pins in velvet boxes. You hoped that if you died, someone would at least tell your mother, maybe read her one of your old letters, the one that said, "Don't worry, I'm eating well." A lie, sure, but a soft one. There was one officer who believed in recognition. Every time a squad completed a tough run, he gave them something from his own pack, a piece of chocolate, a dry sock, a single match. He called them jungle medals. You got one, a clean handkerchief. You carried it for months, still clean. When you finally made it to the end of your route, when your pack was empty and the receiver nodded and took your load, you didn't celebrate. You sat, you untied your sandals, you drank water that didn't taste like leaves. That was enough. Later, they built monuments, paved roads, museums. They put medals in glass boxes and held reunions with old songs and old uniforms. You went once. Everyone looked older, softer, but when you shook their hands, you recognized something behind their eyes. It wasn't about what they wore. It was about what they'd walked. Because the trail didn't award medals, it awarded stories, memories, scars. And if you were lucky, someone to share them with. You didn't need more than that. And then, one day, it ended. Not with a trumpet, not with a banner, unfurling in sunlight, just silence. Someone said the war was over. The trail had done its job. Supplies had moved. Soldiers had arrived. Battles had been won. Cities were falling. Borders were shifting. But on the trail, nothing looked different. You still woke up in mud, still wrapped your feet in cloth, still chewed cold rice with teeth that hurt more than they used to. No parades passed through. No victory flags waved in the jungle breeze. Just another morning of grief. They told you to pack up, move out. The trail was done. You looked at your bicycle, its frame more patched than metal, its wheels worn to nubs. and felt something strange. You should be relieved. You were relieved. But you also felt hollow, like you'd been dismissed from a job no one knew you did. Some soldiers celebrated. They laughed, shouted, fired rifles into the sky. You couldn't. Not yet. You sat beside your last campfire, barely a flicker, barely legal now that the planes weren't coming, and stared at your hands. They were thinner than you remembered, and old. You started the long walk back. No pack this time. No gun. Just your clothes, your boots, what was left of them, and whatever your body had become. You walked past old craters now filled with water lilies, past bombed-out shelters now home to birds, past the ghosts of your younger self, sitting under a tarp, writing letters that never arrived. Some of the trail had vanished, swallowed by jungle, erased by peace. You didn't mind. Let it go. Let the green cover it all. When you reached the village, no one cheered. They looked at you like you were a stranger. You were a stranger, someone who walked too quietly, someone who flinched at firecrackers, someone who stared at trees a little too long. You said hello, you smiled, you answered questions. You didn't say much else. Years passed. The trail stayed with you, in your legs, in your lungs, in your dreams. You'd wake up sometimes, heart racing, sure you were late for a supply drop. You'd smell wet leaves and feel your hand reach for a pack that wasn't there. Some nights you lay in bed and listened to the rain, the soft kind, not the monsoon, the kind that used to mean it was safe to move. You remembered the feeling of soaked sandals and squelching socks and didn't miss it. Not exact. They gave you a certificate one day, a little plaque, said you were a hero. You nodded, thanked them, put it on the wall, but the real memorial was in your knees, in your back, in the way you still walked, like you were carrying something heavy. Sometimes people asked, was it worth it? You didn't answer, not because you didn't know, but because there was no simple answer. The trail didn't give you answers, only memories. You remembered the faces, the laughter, the tiny kindnesses, half a cigarette shared, a spoon of stew passed down the line, a song hummed during a thunderstorm. You remembered the dead, the ones with names, the ones without. You remembered the quiet and how it had become a language of its own. And now, as you sit by the window, older, smaller, slower, you hear the jungle in the breeze. Still out there, still vast, still green, and if you close your eyes, you can feel the weight on your back, the grip of your rifle, the crunch of a trail beneath your feet that no longer exists. But you remember, and that means it's still there. Sweet dream.